My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I've lived my whole life believing I was an only son until I found a photograph that shattered everything, tucked away in a dusty attic box. It showed two boys, identical, with my face staring back at me. But one was a stranger named Elias. My parents lied about his existence, hiding a twin I never knew I had, locked away in a shadowy past. What secrets drove them to erase my brother from our family? Why does the name Willow Grove send chills down my spine? Each clue I uncover pulls me deeper into a web of experiments, betrayal, and a truth so dark it threatens to unravel my very identity. The house on Maplewood Lane holds whispers of a forgotten brother, and I'm determined to find him no matter the cost. Will I discover Elias, or will the secrets of my family consume us both? Dive into the dark secrets of my family. A twin revelation uncovered, where every shadow hides a truth, and every truth demands a price. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I've always felt like a stranger in my own skin. Growing up in the creek and ivy-choked house on Maplewood Lane, I sensed the weight of secrets long before I understood what they were. The air in our home was thick with unspoken truths, the kind that lingered in the corners of rooms, whispering in the dead of night. My family was a puzzle with missing pieces, and I was the fool who thought he could solve it. The house itself was a relic, a three-story Victorian monstrosity that groaned under the burden of its own history. Its gabled roof sagged like an old man's shoulders, and the windows stared out like hollow eyes. My father, Harold, was a man of few words, his face etched with lines that seemed to deepen with every passing year. My mother, Clara, was the opposite, a whirlwind of nervous energy, always fussing over details that didn't matter, as if she could distract herself from something larger. My older sister, Lila, was the only one who seemed to belong, her laughter filling the house like sunlight. But even she had moments when her eyes would drift, staring at nothing, as if she saw something I couldn't. I was 25 when the first crack appeared in the facade of our family. It was a humid August evening, the kind where the air clung to your skin like a second layer. I was in the attic, rummaging through boxers of forgotten things, looking for an old photo album for Lila's upcoming wedding. The attic was a maze of dust-covered relic trunks, stuffed with moth-eaten clothes, stacks of yellowed letters, and furniture draped in sheets like ghosts. The air smelled of mildew and time, and the single bulb overhead flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. That's when I found it. A small, locked box tucked behind a broken, rocking chair. It was no bigger than a cigar box, its wood dark and polished, with a brass clasp that gleamed despite the dust. There was something about it, something that made my heart stutter. I don't know why I didn't just leave it there. Maybe it was the way the lock seemed to dare me to open it, or maybe it was the faint carving on the lid. Two interlocking circles, like a pair of eyes watching me. I carried the box downstairs, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. My parents were out, and Lila was at her place, so I had the kitchen to myself. I grabbed a screwdriver from the drawer and pried the lock open, the wood splintering with a sound like a bone snapping. Inside was a single photograph, its edges curled with age. It showed two boys, no more than 5 years old, standing side by side in identical overalls. Their faces were eerily familiar, with dark hair and wide, curious eyes. One of them was unmistakably me. The other, I had no idea. My breath caught in my throat. I'd never had a brother, let alone a twin. My parents had always said I was their only son, born after years of trying. A miracle they hadn't expected. But this boy, this mirror image of me stared back from the photograph, his expression identical to mine. On the back, in my mother's looping handwriting, were two names, Ethan and Elias. I sat there for what felt like hours, the photograph trembling in my hands. Elias, the name felt like a splinter in my mind, sharp and unfamiliar. Who was he? Why had I never heard of him? The questions gnawed at me, each one sharper than the last. I wanted to confront my parents, to demand answers, but something held me back. A feeling, deep and instinctual, that whatever this was, it was bigger than a single photograph. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house seemed to hum with a new kind of energy, as if the walls themselves were whispering the name Elias. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the photograph tucked under my pillow like a talisman. I kept thinking about the attic, about the boxers I hadn't opened, the secrets they might hold. I didn't know it then, but that photograph was the first thread in a tapestry of lies, one that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. The next morning, I waited until my parents left for their weekly grocery run. Lila was still at her so I had the house to myself again. I climbed back to the attic, my heart pounding as I sifted through the boxers with new purpose. I found more photograph snapshots of me as a child, always alone, never with another boy. But there were other things too. A tiny pair of shoes, scuffed and worn, that didn't match any I remembered owning. A hospital bracelet with the name Elias Caldwell, dated the same day as my birth, and a letter, sealed but never sent, addressed to someone named Dr. Moreau. The letter was in my father's handwriting, precise and angular. It was short, but every word hit like a punch. Dr. Moreau, We've done as you advised. The boy is gone, and Clara is coping as best she can. I don't know if we'll ever forgive ourselves, but we had no choice. The truth would destroy us. Please, keep this between us. Harold. I read it 3 times, each pass making my stomach twist tighter. The boy is gone. The words echoed in my head, louder with every repetition. Gone where? Why? And why had they never told me? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. I stuffed the letter and the hospital bracelet into my pocket and went back downstairs, my mind racing. When my parents returned, I was waiting in the kitchen, the photograph and the letter laid out on the table like evidence in a trial. My mother froze when she saw them, her face draining of color. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. For a moment, the silence was so thick, I thought it might choke me. Ethan, my mother said finally, her voice trembling. Where did you find these? The attic, I said, my own voice sharp. Who's Elias? Why didn't you tell me I had a twin? My father's eyes darkened, and he turned away, busying himself with the groceries. My mother sat down heavily, her hands twisting in her lap. It's complicated, she said, her words barely above a whisper. Complicated, I snapped. You lied to me my entire life. I deserve to know the truth. You don't understand, my mother said, tears welling in her eyes. We did it to protect you. Protect me from what? I demanded. But she wouldn't answer. She just shook her head, her lips pressed tight, and my father stayed silent, his back to me like a wall. I wanted to scream, to shake them until the truth spilled out, but I knew they wouldn't talk. Not yet. That night I lay awake again, the letter and photograph burning a hole in my thoughts. I couldn't let it go. I needed answers, and if my parents wouldn't give them to me, I'd find them myself. The name Dr. Moreau was my only lead, a faint thread in the darkness. I didn't know who he was or what he had to do with Elias, but I was going to find out. The next day I started digging. I searched online for Dr. Moreau, hoping for a clue. It didn't take long to find him, Dr. Samuel Moreau, a psychiatrist who'd practiced in our town 20 years ago. His name popped up in an old article about a local hospital, but there was no mention of him after that. It was like he'd vanished. I found a phone number for the hospital and called, pretending to be a journalist, researching a story. The receptionist was hesitant, but eventually gave me an address for Miro's last known office, a small building on the edge of town. I drove there that afternoon, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The office was abandoned, its windows boarded up, the sign out front faded to a light, but the door was unlocked, and inside I found a treasure trove of forgotten files. Most were mundane patient records, billing forms, but one folder caught my eye. It was labeled Caldwell, E and E. Inside were medical records for 2 boys, Ethan and Elias Caldwell. The notes were clinical, detached, but they painted a chilling picture. Elias had been diagnosed with a rare condition, something called mirror syndrome, a term I'd never heard before. The notes described it as a psychological disorder, one that caused Elias to mimic my behavior to an extreme degree, to the point of obsession. There were mentions of incidents at home fights, accidents, things I didn't remember. The final note, dated a month after our 5th birthday, was the most damning recommendation: institutionalization for Elias. Risk to family deemed too great. I sat there in the dusty office, the file open in my lap, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Institutionalization, my twin brother, locked away somewhere, hidden from me. The weight of it was crushing, but it was only the beginning. There was more to this story, more secrets buried in the shadows of my family's past, and I was going to uncover them all, no matter what it cost me. The abandoned office smelled of damp paper and neglect, the kind of place where time seemed to have stopped. I sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered files, the Caldwell folder open in my lap. The words mirror syndrome and institutionalization burned into my mind, each one a shard of glass cutting deeper. My twin brother Elias had been taken away, hidden from me, and my parents had built a life on that lie. The question wasn't just why they had said it was to protect me, but what else they were hiding? I flipped through the rest of the folder, my hands trembling. There were more notes from Dr. Moreau, each one colder than the last. He described Elias as unstable, with an unhealthy fixation on me. One entry mentioned an incident where Elias had hurt himself, trying to become me, whatever that meant. The details were vague, but the tone was clear. Dr. Moreau thought Elias was dangerous. The final page was a discharge form, dated a month after our 5th birthday, stating that Elias had been transferred to a facility called Willow Grove. There was no address, no contact information, just a name that felt like a dead end. I left the office with the folder tucked under my jacket, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. Outside, the sky was bruised with clouds, and a chill wind carried the promise of rain. I drove home, my thoughts, a tangle of anger and betrayal. My parents had always been distant, but I'd chalked it up to their personalities. My mother's anxiety, now I saw it for what it was. Guilt. They'd erased my brother from our lives, and I'd grown up none the wiser, living in a house built on secrets. When I got home, my parents were in the living room, watching some old movie on the television. The flickering light cast shadows across their faces, making them look older, more worn. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I dropped the folder on the coffee table, the paper spilling out like an accusation. "Willow Grove?" I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "That's where you sent him, isn't it?" My twin brother. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and my father's eyes narrowed, but neither spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the television. I pressed on, my anger spilling over. "I found the records. I know about Elias, about mirror syndrome, about how you locked him away. How could you do that? How could you lie to me for 20 years? My mother's eyes filled with tears, but my father stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "You don't know what you're talking about, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "You were too young to understand." "Then explain it to me," I shouted. I deserved to know who my brother was. "Why you hit him?" My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "It wasn't about hiding him. It was about keeping you safe." "Safe from what?" I snapped. "From my own twin?" My father's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might walk away again, but then he sighed, a sound heavy with years of unspoken weight. "Elias wasn't right," he said finally. "He wasn't like you. He was obsessed with you, Ethan. He'd mimic everything you did, but it wasn't innocent. He'd get violent if he couldn't be you. We tried to help him, but it only got worse." I shook my head, the words not fully sinking in. "So you sent him away, just like that?" "It wasn't just like that," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We loved him, Ethan, but he hurt you. You don't remember, but he did. We had to make a choice." "Hurt me?" I echoed, my mind racing. I had no memory of any violence, no scars or stories to back up their claim. But then, I barely remembered anything from before I was 6. My childhood was a blur of fleeting images, Lila's laughter, my mother's nervous hands, my father's stern silences. Had I buried something deeper? What happened? I asked, my voice softer now, almost afraid of the answer. My parents exchanged a glance, the kind that carried years of shared pain. My mother spoke first, her words halting. "There was an accident. You were both 5. Elias, he pushed you down the stairs. You broke your arm, and you were in the hospital for a week. The doctors said it wasn't his fault. Not really, he didn't understand what he was doing, but we couldn't risk it happening again." I stared at them, my mind reeling. A broken arm. I vaguely remembered a cast, the itch of it against my skin, but I'd always thought it was from falling off a bike. Had they rewritten that memory too? "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why lie about his existence?" "Because we wanted you to have a normal life," my father said. "You were so young, Ethan. We thought if we told you, you'd blame yourself, or you'd spend your life looking for him. We couldn't bear that." I wanted to believe them, but the pieces didn't fit. If Elias was so dangerous, why was there no trace of him? No visits? No letters? No mention of him ever? And why did Dr. Merrow's notes feel so cold? So clinical, like Elias was a problem to be solved rather than a child. I didn't trust their story, not fully. There was more to it, something they weren't saying. "I'm going to find him," I said, the words surprising even me. "I need to know what happened to him." My mother's face crumpled. "Ethan? No, he's gone. Willow Grove? It closed years ago. We don't even know if he's still alive." I finished for her, the words sharp in my mouth. "You don't even know if my brother is alive?" My father stepped forward, his voice firm. "Enough, Ethan. Let this go, for your own sake." But I couldn't. The photograph, the letter, the medical records, they were all pieces of a puzzle I needed to solve. I grabbed the folder and stormed out, ignoring my mother's pleas. I drove to Lila's apartment, my hands shaking on the wheel. If anyone might know something, it was my sister. She was 8 years older than me, old enough to remember things I couldn't. Lila answered the door in sweatpants, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I showed her the photograph, the letter, the records. Her eyes widened as she read, her fingers tracing the names on the hospital bracelet. "Elias?" she murmured, almost to herself. "I haven't thought about him in years." I asked, my voice sharp with betrayal. She nodded, her expression pained. "I was 13 when they sent him away. I didn't understand everything, but I knew something was wrong with him. He was strange, Ethan. He'd follow you everywhere, copy everything you did. It scared me, even as a kid." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I wanted to," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "But Mom and Dad made me promise not to. They said it would hurt you. I was just a kid, Ethan. I didn't know what to do." I sank onto her couch, my head in my hands. "I need to find him, Lila. I need to know what happened." She sat beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder. "I don't know if you'll find what you're looking for," she said softly, "but I'll help you. There's one person who might know more, Mrs. Hargrove. She was our neighbor back then, and she was close to Mom. If anyone knows about Willow Grove, it's her." Mrs. Hargrove. The name sparked a faint memory on older woman with kind eyes, always bringing over casseroles when I was a kid. She'd moved away years ago, but Lila had her address from a Christmas card exchange. It was a start, a fragile thread to follow. That night, I lay awake in Lila's guest room, the photograph of me and Elias on the nightstand. His face haunted me, so like mine, yet so foreign. I didn't know if he was alive, if he was out there somewhere, or if he was just a ghost in my family's past. But I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't stop until I found the truth. The next morning, Lila and I drove to Mrs. Hargrove's house, a small bungalow, an hour outside town. The air was crisp, the leaves turning golden red, but I barely noticed. My mind was on Elias, on a brother I'd never known. Mrs. Hargrove answered the door, her face lined but warm, her eyes lighting up when she saw Lila. "Lila, dear," she said, pulling her into a hug. "And Ethan, my goodness, you've grown." We sat in her cozy living room, surrounded by doilies and framed photos. I didn't waste time. I showed her the photograph, explained what I'd found. Her smile faded, and she looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. "I remember Elias," she said quietly. "He was a sweet boy, but troubled. Your parents were heartbroken when they sent him away. They didn't talk about it much, but I knew it weighed on them." "Do you know where Willow Grove is?" I asked, leaning forward. "Or what happened to him?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. Willow Grove was a private facility out in the countryside. It closed down maybe 15 years ago. I don't know what happened to Elias after that. "But," she trailed off, her gaze distant. "But what?" I pressed. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "There were rumors, Ethan, about the place. People said it wasn't just a hospital. They said experiments, things that weren't right. I never believed it, but your parents, they were different after Elias went there. More closed off. Experiments." The word sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at Lila, who looked as shaken as I felt. "Do you know where it was?" I asked. "The exact location." Mrs. Hargrove shook her head. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I don't, but I have something that might help." She stood and shuffled to a cabinet, pulling out a small box. Inside was a stack of old letters, tied with a ribbon. "Your mother gave me these to keep safe. Years ago, I never read them, but they're from that time. Maybe there's something in there." I took the letters, my heart pounding. Another piece of the puzzle, another thread to pull. I thanked Mrs. Hargrove and left, the weight of the letters heavy in my hands. Back in the car, I opened the first one, my breath catching as I recognized my mother's handwriting. It was addressed to Dr. Moreau, dated a year after Elias was sent away. "Dr. Moreau, I can't sleep. I keep seeing his face, hearing his voice. You said Willow Grove was the best place for him, but I don't know if I believe that anymore. The things they're doing there, I heard whispers. Please, tell me he's safe. Tell me we did the right thing. Clara," I stared at the letter, my blood running cold. Whispers, experiments. The pieces were starting to form a picture, one I wasn't sure I wanted to see, but I couldn't stop now. Elias was out there, somewhere, and I was going to find him no matter what it took. The letters from Mrs. Hargrove's box were like fragments of a shattered mirror, each one reflecting a piece of the truth, but never the whole picture. I sat in Lila's car, the engine idling, as I read through them one by one. My mother's words were raw, desperate, filled with a guilt that seeped through the pages. She wrote to Dr. Moreau repeatedly, begging for updates on Elias, questioning the treatments at Willow Grove, her handwriting growing shakier with each letter. One, dated 2 years after Elias was sent away, stood out. Dr. Moreau. "I visited last month, but they wouldn't let me see him. They said he's in a special program, but they wouldn't explain. I heard screams. Samuel, I know what I heard. Please, tell me what's happening to my son. I can't live with this anymore." Clara screams. The word lodged in my chest like a stone. I handed the letter to Lila, who read it in silence, her face pale. "What were they doing to him?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "I don't know," I said, my throat tight, "but I'm going to find out." We drove back to Lila's apartment, the letters spread out on her kitchen table like a map to a place I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Most were from my mother, but a few were from my father, his tone colder, more resigned. One mentioned a payment to Willow Grove, a sum that made my stomach turn through zillions of dollars, far more than my parents could have afforded back then. Where had the money come from, and why? Lila found a clue in the final letter, a short note from Dr. Moreau himself. It was curt, almost dismissive. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, Elias is stable. The program is progressing as planned. Please direct further inquiries to Willow Grove's administration." At the bottom was an address, faded but legible, for Willow Grove Psychiatric Facility, located in a rural area about 3 hours from our town. "That's where we start," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Lila nodded, but her eyes were troubled. She'd been quiet since we left Mrs. Hargrove's, and I could tell the letters had shaken her. She'd known about Elias, but not the extent of it, not the screams, not this special program. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" she asked, her hands twisting together. What if it's worse than we think?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I was terrified. Every new piece of information felt like a step deeper into a darkness I couldn't fully comprehend, but I couldn't turn back. Elias was my twin, my other half, and I'd lived 20 years without knowing he existed. I owed him this much. The next morning, we set out for Willow Grove. The drive took us through winding country roads, past fields of dying corn and forests that seemed to swallow the light. The GPS struggled to keep up, the signal fading as we ventured deeper into the countryside. By the time we reached the address, the sky was heavy with clouds, and a fine mist had begun to fall. Willow Grove was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured a sterile hospital, all white walls and fluorescent lights, but this was a sprawling, decrepit estate, its stone facade crumbling under years of neglect. The iron gates were rusted, chained shut with a padlock that looked newer than the rest of the place. Beyond the gates, the building loomed like a forgotten castle, its windows dark and empty, ivy snaking up the walls like veins. "It's abandoned," Lila said, her voice small. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "Maybe," I said, but I wasn't so sure. The padlock was too clean, too new. Someone had been here recently. I got out of the car, ignoring Lila's protests, and tested the gate. The chain was tight, but the lock was flimsy. A few hard yanks with a crowbar from the trunk broke it open, the metal snapping with a sound that echoed in the silence. "Ethan, this is a bad idea," Lila said, following me as I pushed the gate open. "We should call someone, get the police, and tell them what." I interrupted, that I'm looking for a brother I didn't know existed, that my parents lied to me. "We need answers, Lila. This is the only place we're going to find them." She didn't argue, but her face was tight with fear as we walked up the overgrown path to the main building. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay, and every step felt like a descent into something I wasn't ready for. The front door was boarded up, but a side entrance hung ajar, its hinges rusted and squealing as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the floor littered with broken glass and peeling wallpaper. The faint drip of water echoed somewhere in the distance, and the shadows seemed to move just out of sight. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. Lila stayed close, her breath shallow. We moved through what must have been a reception area, past a desk covered in moldy papers, and a cracked telephone. The walls were lined with faded photographs, stern-faced doctors, patients in neat rows, their eyes empty. One photo caught my attention, a group of children, all in identical white gowns, standing in front of the building. I couldn't be sure, but one of them looked like me or Elias, Ethan Nayla whispered, pointing to a sign on the wall. It read Ward C, special programs, with an arrow pointing down a dark hallway. My heart thudded in my chest. This was it, the place my mother had written about, the place where Elias had been taken. The hallway was narrow, the air colder with every step. The doors along the corridor were locked, their windows covered in grime. At the end was a heavy metal door, its surface scratched and dented, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. A faded sign above it read observation. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me first. Something sharp and chemical, like antiseptic, mixed with rust. The room was large, with tiled walls and a single rusted gurney in the center. Cabinets lined one wall, their glass doors shattered, and a chalkboard on the far wall was covered in scrawled equations and diagrams I couldn't decipher. In the corner was a pile of files, their edges curling with age. I knelt beside them, my hands shaking as I sifted through the papers. Most were medical charts, filled with jargon I didn't understand, but one name kept appearing: Elias Caldwell. The records detailed treatments that made my skin crawl: electrotherapy, isolation, something called mirror exposure. One note, written in Dr. Murrow's precise handwriting, sent a chill through me. Subject shows increased resistance to reprogramming. Recommend escalation of protocol, Lila said, reading over my shoulder. What does that even mean? I don't know, I said, my voice hoarse, but it doesn't sound like they were trying to help him. We searched the room for anything else, anything that could tell us where Elias had gone after Willow Grove closed. I found a logbook buried under a pile of debris, its pages brittle but intact. It listed patient transfers, and there, near the end, was an entry for Elias, transferred to St. Agnes Home for Children, June 15th, 2005. St. Agnes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That's where he went. Lila frowned. I've heard of that place. It's an orphanage, isn't it? But it's hours away, and I think it's still open. I nodded, my mind racing. An orphanage. If Elias had been sent there, he might still be alive. He'd be 25 now, same as me. The thought of meeting him, of seeing his face, my face, after all these years was both thrilling and terrifying. We left Willow Grove as the rain began to fall in earnest, the building fading into the mist behind us. The drive back was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. I kept seeing that room, those files, the words reprogramming and escalation. What had they done to him? And why had my parents agreed to it? Back at Lila's apartment, we looked up St. Agnes Home for Children. It was still operational, a small facility in a neighboring state, known for taking in troubled kids. The website was sparse, but there was a phone number. I called the next morning, my heart in my throat, and spoke to a woman named Ms. Carter, the director. I told her I was looking for my brother Elias Caldwell, who'd been transferred there years ago. There was a long pause on the other end. Elias Caldwell, she said finally, her voice cautious. I'd need to check our records. Can you come in person? We don't discuss former residence over the phone. I agreed, and Lila and I made plans to drive to St. Agnes the next day. That night, I dreamed of Elias for the first time. In the dream, we were kids again, standing side by side in a dark room, our reflections distorted in a cracked mirror. He turned to me, his eyes empty, and said, "You left me." I woke up gasping, the words echoing in my head. The drive to St. Agnes was long, the roads winding through hills that seemed to close in around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every shadow held a piece of the truth I was chasing. Lila tried to keep the mood light, talking about her wedding plans, but I could tell she was as nervous as I was. When we arrived, St. Agnes was nothing like Willow Grove. It was a modest brick building, surrounded by a well-kept lawn and a playground where kids laughed and ran. Miss Carter met us at the entrance, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a cautious smile. She led us to her office, a small room filled with books and framed certificates. "I looked into Elias Caldwell," she said, closing the door behind us. "He was here from 2005 to 2010, when he aged out of the system. He was a unique case." "Unique how?" I asked, my heart pounding. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Elias was very withdrawn when he arrived. He'd been through a lot, from what I could gather. He didn't talk much, but he was obsessed with drawing always. The same image, two boys who looked identical. We assumed it was him and a brother." "That's me," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm his twin." Miss Carter's eyes softened. "I'm sorry, Ethan, I didn't know. Elias never mentioned you by name, but he carried a lot of pain. He left when he turned 18, and we lost track of him after that. He didn't leave a forwarding address." "Do you have anything of his?" I asked. "Anything that might tell me where he went?" She nodded and pulled a small box from a filing cabinet. Inside were a few drawings, all of them hauntingly familiar to boys, hand in hand, their faces blurred but unmistakable. There was also a journal, its pages filled with Elias's handwriting, jagged and uneven. I opened it, my hands trembling, and read the first entry. "I see him in my dreams. Ethan, he doesn't know I exist, but I know him. I'll find him someday. I closed the journal, my eyes burning. Elias was out there, looking for me, just as I was looking for him. The weight of it was overwhelming, but it gave me hope. He was alive, or at least he had been, and I was closer to finding him than ever before. The journal in my hands felt alive, as if Elias's words were pulsing through the pages, reaching across the years to find me. I sat in Miss Carter's office at St. Agnes, the air heavy with the scent of old books and lavender air freshener. Lila sat beside me, her eyes fixed on the drawings. Elias had left behind two boys. Always two, their faces hauntingly familiar. Miss Carter watched us with a mix of sympathy and unease, as if she knew more than she was saying. "Did he ever talk about where he might go?" I asked, my voice rough. "After he left here," Miss Carter shook her head, her fingers tracing the edge of her desk. "Elias was guarded. He didn't trust Gisely, not after what he'd been through. He mentioned wanting to find his other half. Those were his words. I assumed he meant you, Ethan, but he never said where he'd look. When he turned 18, he packed a bag and left. That was the last we heard of him." I flipped through the journal, its pages filled with fragmented thoughts, sketches, and cryptic phrases. Some entries were mundane descriptions of meals at St. Agnes, complaints about the weather, but others were darker, tinged with a longing that bordered on obsession. One entry, dated a year before he left, stopped me cold. "They took everything from me. My face, my name, my brother. Willow Grove wasn't a hospital, it was a cage. But I'm free now, and I'll find him. I'll make them pay for what they did." "Who's they?" Lila asked, reading over my shoulder. Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if she feared the answer. I didn't know, but the words sent a chill through me. Willow Grove again. The place kept coming up, a shadow that refused to fade. I thanked Miss Carter and took the journal and drawings, promising to return them if I found Elias. She gave me a sad smile, the kind that said she didn't expect me to succeed. Back in the car, Lila was quiet, her hands gripping the steering wheel as we pulled onto the highway. The rain from yesterday had cleared, leaving the world bright and sharp, but I felt like I was drowning. Elias's journal was a lifeline, but it was also a weight, pulling me deeper into a mystery I wasn't sure I could solve. "What now?" Leela asked finally, glancing at me. "He could be anywhere. Ethan, it's been 7 years." "I know," I said, my eyes on the journal in my lap. "But he's looking for me. I can feel it. I need to figure out what happened at Willow Grove." Lila frowned, her brow creasing. "Those letters, Mom's letters, they mentioned experiments. What if Elias wasn't just sent away? What if they did something to him?" The question hung between us, heavy and unanswered. I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't stop. The medical records, the special program, the word reprogramming, it all pointed to something far worse than a troubled kid being sent to a psychiatric facility. I needed to know more about Willow Grove, about Dr. Moreau, about what my parents had agreed to. When we got back to Lila's apartment, I spread the journal and drawings out on our dining table, alongside the letters from Mrs. Hargrove and the files from Willow Grove. It was a chaotic mosaic of my family's past, each piece raising more questions than answers. I started with the journal, reading every entry, searching for clues. Elias wrote about his time at Willow Grove in fragments, as if the memories were too painful to commit fully to paper. He mentioned the room with the mirrors, where he was forced to confront his reflection for hours, and the doctors who didn't smile, who asked him questions about me, about Ethan. One entry, written in a shaky hand, made my heart stop. They wanted to know why I wasn't him. They said I was a mistake, a shadow, but I'm not. I'm Elias. I'm real, and I'll find him no matter what they did to me. I read it aloud to Lila, my voice trembling. She pressed her hands to her face, her eyes glistening. Ethan, it's awful. What kind of place does that to a kid? I don't know, I said, but I'm going to find out. I need to talk to someone who worked at Willow Grove, someone who was there when Elias was. Lila nodded, grabbing her laptop. Let's see what we can find. Maybe there's a record of the staff, or someone who's still around. We spent hours searching online, piecing together what we could about Willow Grove. Most of what we found was vague old articles about its closure, rumors of mismanagement, a few mentions of lawsuits that never went anywhere. But one name kept appearing: Dr. Evelyn Kessler, a psychiatrist who'd worked at Willow Grove during its final years. She was retired now, living in a small town 2 hours away, according to a recent article about her volunteer work at a local clinic. She might know something, I said, my pulse quickening. She was there when Elias was. She could have answers. Lila hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Ethan, are you sure you want to keep going? It's getting darker. What if you find something you can't handle? I looked at her, my sister, the one person who'd always been there for me, even when she kept her own secrets. I have to. Lila, he's my brother. I can't just let him go. She nodded, her expression resolute. Okay, then we'll do this together. The next day, we drove to the town where Dr. Kessler lived, a quiet place with tree-lined streets and tidy houses. Her address was easy to find, a small cottage with a garden full of roses. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding, the journal tucked under my arm like a shield. An older woman answered, her hair silver and her eyes sharp despite her age. She introduced herself as Evelyn Kessler, her voice calm but guarded. I'm Ethan Caldwell, I said, holding up the photograph of me and Elias. This is my twin brother, Elias. He was at Willow Grove when you worked there. I need to know what happened to him. Her face changed, a flicker of something's fear maybe, or regret crossing her features before she masked it. Come in, she said, stepping aside, but I'm not sure how much I can help. We sat in her living room, the air thick with the scent of roses and old wood. I showed her the journal, the letters, the medical records. She listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. When I finished, she sighed, a sound heavy with years of carrying something unspoken. Willow Grove was a complicated place, she said finally. We were trying to help children with severe psychological issues, but the methods, some of them were experimental, unorthodox. Elias was part of a program designed to treat what they called mirror syndrome. What is that, exactly? I asked, my voice sharp. The records mention it, but they don't explain. Dr. Kessler hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Mirror syndrome was a term we used for a rare condition, where one twin develops an extreme psychological dependence on the other, to the point of losing their own identity. Elias was consumed by you, Ethan. He didn't just mimic you. He believed he was you, or should be. The program was meant to help him develop his own sense of self, but it was harsh. Lila asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Kessler looked away, her fingers tightening around each other. Isolation, sensory deprivation, exposure to mirrors to force self-recognition. It was controversial, even then. I didn't agree with it, but I wasn't in charge. Dr. Moreau was, and he believed it was the only way. My stomach churned, and my parents, they knew about this. She nodded slowly. They were desperate. They thought they were saving you both. Elias had hurt you, Ethan, more than once. They were afraid of what he might do if he stayed. I felt sick. The room spinning around me. What happened to him after Willow Grove closed? He was transferred to St. Agnes, she said. The program ended when the facility shut down, and most of the records were destroyed. I'm sorry, Ethan. I wish I could tell you more. I didn't believe her. Not completely. Her eyes held something back. A shadow of guilt or fear. But I thanked her and left, the journal heavier in my hands than ever. Outside, Lila grabbed my arm, her face pale. She's lying, she said. Or at least, she's not telling us everything. Did you see how she looked when you mentioned Elias? I nodded, my mind racing. We need to find those records. Whatever's left of them. If Willow Grove's files were destroyed, there has to be something somewhere. Backup copies? Archives? Something. That night, back at Lila's, I couldn't sleep. I kept reading Ilyas's journal, searching for anything I'd missed. One entry, near the end, caught my eye. I found a name. Kessler. She was kind, but she knew. They all knew if I ever get out, I'll make them tell the truth. I'll find Ethan, and we'll be whole again. Kessler? She'd been kind to him, but she was part of whatever had happened at Willow Grove. I didn't know if Elias was still looking for me, if he was even alive. but I felt him, like a phantom limb I'd never known I had. The truth was out there, buried in the ruins of my family's past, and I was going to dig it up, no matter how deep I had to go. The journal had become my anchor, Elias's words, a map to a truth I was both desperate and terrified to uncover. I sat in Lila's dimly lit apartment, the pages spread out before me, their edges worn from my constant handling. Each entry felt like a conversation with my twin, his voice reaching across the years, fragmented but alive. The mention of Dr. Kessler and his final entries noted me she knew more than she'd let on, and I wasn't done with her yet. But first, I needed to find any trace of Willow Grove's records, anything that could tell me what had really happened to Elias. Lila was relentless, scouring online forums and old news archives for any mention of Willow Grove's closure. Most of what we found was speculation, conspiracy theories about experimental treatments, hushed-up scandals, and missing patients. One post, buried in a defunct message board, mentioned a fire at Willow Grove shortly after it shut down, supposedly to destroy evidence. The poster claims some records had been salvaged and stored in a state archive, but there was no location, no proof. It was a lead, though, and I clung to it like a lifeline. "We need to go back to Kessler," I said, my voice firm despite the exhaustion creeping into my bones. "She's hiding something. I could see it in her eyes." Lila nodded, her face set. "I'll come with you, but we need a plan. She's not going to just open up because we ask nicely." We spent the next morning preparing, combing through Elias's journal for anything we could use to press her. One entry stood out, written in a hurried scrawl. "Kessler gave me a book once, said it would help me find myself. It was full of lies, just like her. They're all liars." The bitterness in his words was palpable, and it gave me an idea. If Kessler had been kind to him, maybe I could use that to get her to talk. We drove back to her cottage the next day, the air crisp with the first bite of autumn. The roses in her garden were starting to wilt, their petals curling like secrets kept too long. She answered the door, her expression wary but not surprised, as if she'd been expecting us. "Ethan," she said, her voice measured. "Lila, I didn't think you'd be back so soon." "I found his journal," I said, holding it up. "Elias wrote about you. He said you were kind, that you gave him a book. He trusted you, but he thought you lied to him. Why?" Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might close the door. But she stepped aside, gesturing us in. "You don't understand what it was like," she said, her voice low. "Willow Grove wasn't just a hospital. It was a machine. They had funding from places I never saw. People who wanted results, not questions." "What kind of results?" I pressed, my heart pounding. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly. "The Mirror Syndrome program, it wasn't about curing Elias, it was about control. They believed twins like him, with such a strong connection to their sibling, could be rewired, used for something else. I don't know what. Exactly. I was just a junior doctor, following orders. Used." Lila's voice was sharp. "Used for what?" Kessler shook her head, her eyes distant. "I don't know, I swear. But there were other patients. They'd take kids like Elias to a separate wing, when I wasn't allowed in. I heard things, though. Machines humming, voices, chanting. It wasn't right. I felt sick, the room tilting around me, and my parents, they knew about this. They didn't know everything," she said. "They thought they were helping him. Dr. Merrill convinced them it was the only way. But after the first year, your mother started asking questions. She stopped coming to the sessions, stopped trusting us. That's when they cut her off." "Cut her off," I echoed, my voice hoarse. Kessler nodded. "They told her Elias was too unstable for visits. It broke her. Ethan, you have to understand she loved him, but she was afraid of what he might do to you." I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Where are the records? You said they were destroyed, but there have to be copies somewhere." She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the journal in my hands. "There's a chance. Some files were sent to a state archive before the fire. I don't know where, exactly, but I heard rumors of a facility in... That's all I know. Concord." I thanked her, my voice tight, and we left, the journal burning in my hands. In the car, Lila was quiet, her eyes fixed on the road. "This is bigger than we thought," she said finally. "What if Elias wasn't just a patient? What if he was, I don't know, a test subject?" The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing it aloud made it real. I didn't answer, my mind racing with images of Elias in that separate wing, surrounded by machines and faceless doctors. I needed those records. Needed to know what they'd done to him on why. The drive to Concord took us through the night, the headlights cutting through a darkness that felt alive. The state archive was a gray, bureaucratic building, its halls lined with endless rows of files. We posed as researchers, claiming we were studying the history of psychiatric care in the state. The clerk, a bored woman with glasses perched on her nose, barely glanced at our IDs before handing us a visitor pass. The archive was a labyrinth of boxers and folders, the air thick with the smell of old paper. We searched for hours, sifting through records of closed hospitals, defunct programs, anything related to Willow Grove. Just when I thought we'd hit another dead end, Lila found he had a box labeled WGPF 2005, tucked away on a high shelf. Inside were files, dozens of them, yellowed and brittle but intact. I found Elias's name almost immediately, in a folder marked Special Program, Mirror Project. The documents were dense with medical jargon, but the details were chilling. The Mirror Project wasn't just about treating mirror syndrome. It was about harnessing the connection between twins, using one to influence the other. There were references to neural synchronization and behavioral mapping, terms that sounded more like science fiction than medicine. One report, signed by Dr. Moreau, mentioned Elias specifically. Subject DC shows remarkable resilience to protocol. Potential for Phase 2, pending approval. Phase 2, Lila whispered, her voice trembling. What does that mean? I don't know, I said, my hands shaken as I turned the pages. But the next document stopped me cold. It was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable, of Elias strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to his head, his eyes wide with fear. The caption read, Subject EC, Mirror Exposure Trial, March 2005. I dropped the file, my breath coming in short gasps. Lila grabbed my arm, her face pale. Ethan, we need to get out of here. This is too much. But I couldn't move. The image of Elias, my twin, my mirror, burned into my mind. What had they done to him? And why had my parents let it happen? The questions were a storm, tearing through me. But one thing was clear. Elias wasn't just a patient. He was a victim. We took the files, slipping them into my bag before the clerk noticed. Back in the car, I couldn't stop shaking. The photograph seared into my thoughts. Lila drove, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. What now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We find him, I said, my voice hard. He's out there, Lila. He's looking for me, and I'm going to find him first. That night I pored over the files, searching for any clue to Elias's whereabouts after St. Agnes. One document mentioned a relocation program for former Willow Grove patients, with a contact name, Dr. Leonard Price, a researcher who'd worked on the Mirror Project. He was still alive, according to a recent academic paper, teaching at a small college in upstate New York. He's our next lead, I said to Lila, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. If anyone knows where Elias is, it's him. She nodded, but her eyes were troubled. Eve, what if he's not the same? What if what they did to him changed him? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. The Elias in the journal, in the photograph, was a boy desperate to find his brother, to reclaim his place in the world. But the Elias out there now, after years of experiments, of pain, what would he be like? Would he even recognize me? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the next step. Dr. Pricey was the key, the final piece of the puzzle. I didn't know what I'd find when I faced him, but I knew one thing. I was closer to Elias than I'd ever been, and nothing was going to stop me from finding him. The road to upstate New York was a blur of asphalt and fading daylight, the weight of Elias's journal and the stolen Willow Grove files heavy in my bag. Lila drove in silence, her eyes fixed on the horizon, while I stared at the passing trees, their branches clawing at the sky like fingers reaching for something lost. Dr. Leonard Price was our last hope, the final thread in a tapestry of lies that had unraveled my life. I didn't know what I'd find when we reached him, but I knew it would change everything. The college where Price taught was a small EVA-covered campus, its buildings quaint but imposing in the dusk. We found his office in the psychology department, a cramped room stuffed with books and papers, the air thick with the smell of coffee and old leather. Price was older than I'd expected, his hair white and thinning, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up from his desk as we entered, his expression shifting from curiosity to caution when I introduced myself. Ethan Caldwell, he said, his voice slow, as if testing the name. And you're here about Elias? I nodded, pulling out the photograph of us as boys, the one that had started this nightmare. He's my twin. He was part of the Mirror Project at Willow Grove. I know you work there. I need to know what happened to him. Prize's face tightened, and he leaned back in his chair, his hands folding together. That was a long time ago, he said. Willow Grove is gone. The project is over. Not for me, I said, my voice hard. I set the stolen files on his desk, the photograph of Elias strapped to the chair on top. I found these in the state archive. They mention you, Dr. Price. The Mirror Project wasn't just treatment, was it? What did you do to my brother? He stared at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, but then he sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. You don't understand what we were trying to do, he said. The Mirror Project was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. We thought we could unlock the potential of the twin bond, use it to understand consciousness, identity. Elias was special. His connection to you was stronger than anything we'd seen. Special, I snapped, my anger flaring. You strapped him to a chair, you ran experiments on him. He was 5 years old. Price flinched, his eyes dropping to the desk. I wasn't in charge, he said. He believed Elias could be a breakthrough, that his fixation on you could be harnessed. But it went too far. The treatment's electrotherapy, sensory manipulation. They were meant to separate his identity from yours. But they broke him. Lila's voice was sharp, her hands clenched at her sides. What does that mean? Price looked up, his eyes haunted. Elias became erratic, unpredictable. By the time Willow Grove closed, he was barely communicative. We transferred him to St. Agnes, hoping they could help. But I don't know what happened after that. I left the project, left the field entirely. I couldn't stomach it anymore. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Where is he now? I demanded. You have to know something. Price hesitated, his gaze flickering to the files. There was a relocation program, he said finally. Some patients were sent to private facilities, others to foster care. Elias? I heard he was placed with a family in Vermont, but I don't have a name or an address. The records were scattered after the fire. Vermont. It was something, but it felt like chasing a ghost. I pressed him for more, but he claimed he had nothing else. His voice tinged with a guilt that felt genuine but incomplete. As we left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still holding back, that the truth was deeper, darker than he'd admitted. Back in the car, Leela was quiet, her hands gripping the wheel. What now, Ethan? She asked. Vermont's a big place. We don't even know if he's still there. I'll find him, I said, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. He's my brother. I owe him that much. We drove to Vermont the next day, armed with nothing but a vague lead and Elias's journal. I spent the drive reading his entries again, searching for anything that might point to where he'd gone. One passage, written just before he left St. Agnes, gave me pause. I saw him in a dream last night. Ethan, but older, like me, he was looking for me, calling my name. I'll go to the place where the trees touch the sky. That's where we'll meet. The place where the trees touch the sky. It was poetic, cryptic, but it felt like a clue. I searched online for anything matching that description in Vermont, and one result stood out. A small town called Skyhaven, nestled in the Green Mountains, known for its dense forests and towering pines. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. Skyhaven was a quiet town, its streets lined with quaint shops and houses that seemed frozen in time. We started at the local library, asking about foster records, or anyone who might have known a boy named Elias Caldwell. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes, remembered a family who'd taken in a boy matching Elias's description years ago, who lived on a farm just outside town. We drove to the farm, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. The house was old but well kept, surrounded by fields and a forest that stretched toward the horizon, the treetops brushing the clouds. A woman answered the door, her face weathered but warm. She introduced herself as Margaret Thompson, and when I mentioned Elias, her expression soft. He was with us for a few years, she said, inviting us inside. Quiet boy, kept to himself. He'd spend hours in the woods, drawing or writing in that journal of his. He left when he turned 21. Said he had to find his brother. My breath caught. Did he say where he was going? Margaret shook her head. He didn't say much, but he left something behind. Wait here. She disappeared into another room and returned with a small wooden box, its surface carved with two interlocking circles, the same design as the box I'd found in the attic. Inside was a single drawing, more detailed than the ones at St. Agnes. It showed two men, their faces identical, standing in a forest under a starry sky. On the back, in Elias's handwriting, was a single word, home. He talked about you sometimes, Margaret said, her voice gentle. I said you were out there waiting for him. I think you went back to where it all started. Home. The word hit me like a punch. Maplewood Lane, the house where we'd been born, where Elias had been taken from me. I thanked Margaret, my voice thick, and we left, the drawing clutched in my hand. The drive back to our hometown was silent, the weight of what was coming pressing down on us both. When we reached the house, it was late, the moon casting long shadows across the lawn. My parents were asleep, the house dark and quiet. I didn't wake them. This wasn't about them anymore. I went to the attic, the place where it had all begun, and sat among the boxers, the drawing in my lap. The air was heavy, the silence alive with the ghosts of my family's past. And then I heard it a creak, on the stairs, soft but deliberate. My heart stopped, my eyes fixed on the attic door. It opened slowly, and there he was. Elias, my twin. His face was mine, but older, worn, his eyes carrying a weight I couldn't fathom. He wore a faded jacket, his hair longer than mine, but the resemblance was undeniable. He was real. Ethan, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. You found me? I stood, my legs shaking, the drawing falling to the floor. Elias, I said, my voice breaking. I'm sorry, I didn't know. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. I waited for you, he said. All those years, I waited. They tried to take you from me, but I never forgot. We stood there, two halves of a whole, separated by years and lies but bound by something deeper. I wanted to ask him everything what had happened at Willow Grove, what he'd been through, why he'd come back, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I hugged him, my twin, my mirror, and for the first time in my life, I felt complete. The days that followed were a blur. Elias told me his story in fragments, the pain of Willow Grove still raw. The experiments had left scars, physical and mental, but he'd survived, driven by the need to find me. My parents, when they saw him, wept, their guilt spilling out in apologies that felt too late. Lila became our bridge, helping us navigate the fractured pieces of our family. The truth about Willow Grove never fully came to light. The records were incomplete, the people involved scattered or silent, but I had Elias, and that was enough. We rebuilt our bond slowly, learning each other's lives, filling in the gaps left by years apart. The house on Maplewood Lane, once heavy with secrets, began to feel like a home again. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch Elias staring at me, his eyes distant, as if seeing something I couldn't. The Mirror Project had taken something from him, something I couldn't replace. And in those moments, I wondered if the secrets were truly gone or if they were still waiting, hidden in the shadows, ready to pull us back into the dark.